And we do have breaking news here out of Paris, a major development on this day, a very important day in French history. It was 1 year ago that the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened, and now what was feared most on this occasion may be unfolding right now in Paris, and that's why we are here. You see Allison and Michaela are in New York. Let's get to this breaking news right now. We have Jim Bitterman with us. We're very lucky to have you because of your contacts. We hear that the incident was involving a police station and a man who came. There's a suggestion about what kind of weaponry he may have had, and that he was saying Allahu Akbar, which, as we all know, an activated phrase for Islamic extremists.
Right. None of this has been confirmed, Chris, but in fact what we're hearing from police sources and from the spokesman for the Interior Ministry said that apparently someone tried to get in the commissariat in the 18th arrondissement, so the north of Paris, in a fairly socially mixed neighborhood, if one could say that, that somebody came at the police station, tried to break in with a knife, armed with a knife, and that he was stopped by a policeman who shot him dead, and they are now in the process of bringing in a demining machine, which is an explosive, anti-explosives robot, to look over what the man was carrying. There is some suspicion he either had a suicide belt with him or some kind of explosive device, but they're looking into that right now.
All right, and now in terms of this was the threat, right? This is the worry about having a copycat occasion. We know that different terrorist organizations, certainly ISIS, has been encouraging this. What are the authorities saying about where they are in terms of their level of ability to defend against?
Well, on this particular instance, they're saying, well, look, this just worked perfectly. The police shot the guy before he got a chance to come into the police station. However, I mean, I think this is really the thing that is driving people here a little bit crazy, because, you know, you have these folks who can perpetrate something like this individually. They don't have to be ordered from headquarters or somewhere out in Syria or whatever. They can just on their own take their own initiative, and very difficult to spot or to head off ahead of time.
We also got Paul Cruikshank in here. Obviously, you've been breaking the news this morning, as Jim has been following along as well, that the investigation into who did these horrible attacks in November has expanded, that there are 2 people still at large. And now this is the concern about having minds at large that want to do terrible things to people in France and elsewhere in Europe, and let's be honest, anywhere in the world right now. This situation, let's assume that he doesn't have a good belt on. Let's assume he's a phony, this guy, that he just wanted to get involved with it. That's still part of the threat that's discernible, right?
Absolutely, Chris. I mean, officials have been telling me one of their biggest concerns, copycat attacks, that the radicalized community here in France, other countries, they've been energized massively by what they saw play out here in Paris in November. They're very, very concerned about this threat of ISIS-inspired attacks. We've also seen ISIS operatives in Syria and Iraq directly instigate attacks here in France, reaching out to individuals here over social media and calling for them to launch attacks against various targets. All of that adding to the threat matrix here in Europe. In France alone, there are 10,500 individuals, according to the authorities, who have been flagged by the authorities for Islamist extremism, sympathy with violent extremism. That's a very large number, multiples of that throughout Europe. This is an unprecedented threat they're dealing with now across the continent. The Prime Minister of Belgium, just before the new year, after those fireworks were cancelled, Charles Michel, said this is an entirely new era in the history of Europe. Europeans have to do more, that it's intolerable that the citizens of Europe can't go shopping, can't go to the cinema, can't go out without fear of being killed.
And sure enough, it's playing out right now. Jim and Paul, stay with me. And to be clear, we're dealing with news right now that we're trying to track down, that there was an incident at a police station here in Paris. A man that we're being told may have been coming with some kind of weapon, maybe a knife, tried to get in, said the talismanic phrase of Allahu Akbar, that, you know, that obviously triggers a fear of terrorism. He was taken out by police. He is dead. They now have explosive experts there to see whether or not he was carrying a device that could have been explosive. So we have Paul Cruikshank. We also want to bring in, with Jim Bitterman here, Jean-Paul Rouillet. He's the director of the Geneva Center for Training and Analysis of Terrorism and former senior Swiss counterterrorism official. And as you've been hearing us talk, Jean-Paul, this is the concern of a copycat. Even if this man turns out to be a phony, it doesn't take much to get involved in this, and it could have very dangerous implications.
Yeah, indeed, it would have very dangerous implications. But when you say copycat attack, if that guy just had a knife, this is exactly the same scenario that we saw last year in November. In November, no, it was not last year, it was 2 years ago. In November 2014, when a guy armed with a knife tried to enter into a police precinct and tried to kill police officers. So this is nothing new, and this is most probably what has just occurred today in Paris.
So we're hearing that it was the French Interior Minister spokesman from that department that said the Allahu Akbar was said, and that obviously set off the urgency for the police there. Jean-Paul, let me stay with you on this in terms of how you deal with the copycat. I mean, is it an impossibility to stop all of these? That's what we've come to realize in the United States. You can't stop them all. What do you do to focus efforts against such a broad threat?
I mean, in that specific case, and again, I mean, that's going to be a totally different scenario if you really was just having a knife or if he was having an explosive belt. That's going to be two totally different things with a total different set of implications. But let's assume he was just having a knife, and this could be the kind of guy who just wakes up in the morning, you know, and who decides that today is going to be his day. And in such a case, I mean, there's absolutely no way any police or any intelligence agency can foresee such a thing and can stop it. I mean, there's absolutely no way you can do anything to prevent such kind of actions. And I think Europe has realized that now.
And, you know, Jean-Paul's raising an interesting point that you've raised also, Jim, in helping me get ready for the coverage today, that this is something new for Parisian society to deal with, that you're not going to be able to stop all of these, that there is an ongoing threat that you can't just put out of your mind. Let's deal with this man at the minimum, given the information we have right now. Let's say a deranged man with a knife, until we know more. That's certainly what he proposed when he said what he said in front of a police station. What does that mean in terms of how it impacts life?
Well, and you know, as we were talking, I was thinking about what took place in Israel, where we've seen, you know, knife-wielding attackers repeatedly go after civilians, and there's very, very little one of the best security apparatus in the world can do to prevent that. And I think it's the same thing can be said here. There's very, very little that can be done to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So, of course, that really terrifies people. People are afraid to go out in gatherings and whatnot. This today, I think, will just really set people back on edge again after the attacks of November 13th.
Because, Paul, when we were here after Charlie Hebdo, you know, Jim was very instructive in saying how, look, you know, this was a target attack. This, in the Parisians' minds, this was targeted. This was about Charlie Hebdo. This isn't about all of us. Let's get back to life as soon as possible. Then November happens. You see, it could be anyone, anywhere, at any time, which is what we've become painfully familiar with in the United States. And now you have this. Random one-offs who are just trying to do anything disruptive, all different threats, all different capabilities to try to stop them, and they get more difficult to stop as they get more simple.
Very difficult to stop just a knifeman, as Jean-Paul was talking about. How do you tell when somebody's going to go from radical thought to radical action, to violent action? Radical thought is not a crime in our societies. But obviously violent action is, and so very, very difficult for authorities. They can't just go and lock up everybody they think is radical. But the bigger threat is this ISIS-directed threat now, that ISIS is pivoting towards international terrorism. This is a group that's the richest terrorist group in history. It's got control of all that territory in Syria and Iraq, still also Libya. There are 6,000 European extremists that have gone to Syria and Iraq to join with them, 1,500 who've come back. So this is an unprecedented threat that the European security agencies are now facing.
Now, let's just deal with the information that we have. It's not naked speculation that the man might have had an explosive device, because we do know that they have explosive assets on the ground examining the situation. That takes it into a different phase, not just in lethality, but also playing into the investigation that Paul brought us new information about this morning, that these two men are still at large, that they believe were the sophisticated part of the planning for what happened here in November, including finding sewing machines that were involved in the stitching of those explosive belts. That's the kind of know-how that you need to root out immediately. Hopefully it's not at play again here in this report this morning.
Exactly, and these are sort of disturbing new details about the Paris plot in November, that it turns out that Abdelhamid Abaoud, well, he was the ringleader on the ground here in Paris, but it appears he was answering to two more senior people in the conspiracy who were in Belgium at that time on the phone with various of the Paris attackers. and who are still at large. They feel that they're close to identifying them right now, but they are still at large, still possibly dangerous, still possibly planning a new round of attacks here in Europe. This is going to be a very worrying year, 2016, right across the continent. And as ISIS loses some territory in Syria and Iraq, I think they're likely to accelerate attack plotting because they want to lash out and also to demonstrate to their supporters around the world that they can still launch these big operations, that they can still, in their words, remain and expand.
All right, Jean-Paul, thank you very much. Jim, you going to have a final word for us?
One thing, and that is that one of the things that people here have been complaining about is there hasn't been an adequate investigation of what the police knew all the way along from Charlie Hebdo through November 13th and after November 13th, what they've known. There hasn't been a parliamentary apparatus or a full investigation to look at all this information to see if things are being missed and what can be done further.
So they're going to be dealing with the long-range implications. We're going to be dealing with this specific threat this morning. Jim, nobody's got better contacts than you. So Jim Bitterman, Paul Cruikshank are going to stay on this. Jean-Paul Rouillet, thank you very much. Allison, when we get more information, I'll come back to you with it.
Okay, please do, Chris. We will stay on top of that breaking news out of Paris.